Hello and welcome to our video here, topic 4. We're going to be talking about Russian political institutions. Let's just talk about general institutions in Russia. Russia has a long history of authoritarian regimes going all the way back to the power of the Tsar. They've used a federal system of government going back to the beginnings of the Soviet Union. The federal system works really well for Russia because of its extreme size. It still uses this federal system today, but it's really not a federal system like in the United States. They have asymmetric federalism, where different parts of the Russian Federation have more powers than others, more independence than others. So it's really, there's a great deal of imbalance between those different parts of the Federation. When we talk about political parties in Russia, we can go all the way back to 1993 with the end of the old Soviet Union, the establishment of the new democratic government. We had a huge explosion of new parties on the scene in 1993, most of them revolving around specific leaders and different personalities. There's been a great deal of fluctuation with political parties in Russia. They still have quite a number of political parties that participate, but they come and go. There isn't a very much party loyalty. And again, since 2005, we actually seen a decline in the number of political parties, mainly due to the changes Putin has made in terms of the election system, the way the Duma is elected, which we'll be talking about here soon. All right, the first party is United Russia, or the Unity Party, and that's Putin's party. This was founded back in 2001 to support Putin's presidency. Oligarchs were behind its creation. It is the most powerful party in Russia even today. Putin is the leader of the Unity Party, and kind of the interesting thing here about United Russia is the fact that it doesn't really have much of a ideology that is its own. It has an ideology of whatever Putin supports is what the Unity Party supports. All right, the second most influential party in Russia, and it's actually lost some of its importance in the last decade, is the Communist Party. Again, this is what's left of the old Communist Party under the Soviet Union. It is definitely the least reformist of any of the political parties, and it really is a beacon to those older Russians who would like to see a return to the prominence of the old Soviet Union. They'd like to see the command economy come back, and they'd like to see, the power and the prestige of the old Soviet Union returned. The Liberal Democrats, this is a pretty poorly named political party because they really don't espouse what you would expect of a liberal democratic party. Very controversial, headed by Vladimir Zhirinovsky. He's discussed using nukes on Japan. He's anti-Semitic. He's made public sexist comments. But the party itself, outside of some of his missteps, have won seats in the Duma pretty consistently. There are some other parties that also are going to win seats in the Duma, one called A Just Russia. This is a party led by the Federation Council, Speaker of the Federation Council, Sergei Mironov. It's won some seats in the Duma. The Patriots of Russia is a newer party. Many people believe this party was actually created by Putin in the Kremlin as a competitive party to limit the influence of some of the others. So Putin has gone as far as to create other parties to create some competition with the other parties that are against Putin's power and Putin's decision-making. So pretty interesting development there. Russian political parties are not so much the ideological parties that we go back to 1993. They've really changed to what are called parties of power. And they're really going to be parties that are sponsored by the most influential economic and elements of political leadership in the country. So again, political parties, there's still quite a few out there. They've never really gained a really strong foothold with the people. And again, they've transitioned from being very ideological to almost political tools by the economic and political leaders. All right, we have a couple different types of election that are going to take place in Russia. The referendum is basically the first type of election or a decision maker. The president is going to call for these. There's been 3 in Russian history. One was on a discussion, a yes or no, if Yeltsin should continue in his job at the beginning. 2, a ratification of the '93 Constitution. And 3, a referendum on Chechnyan independence. Again, these are yes or no questions that are put out to the Russian people, and the Constitution gives these binding power. The president calls them, the people answer, and that decision is binding. The Duma is going to have very competitive elections. The Duma is the lower of the 2 houses in the Russian legislature. These seats are filled by proportional representation. There are 450 seats. Parties must get at least 7% of the vote in order to seat their candidates. All right, we also have presidential elections. So we have Referendums, we have elections in the legislature for the lower house, and we also have a directly elected president. It's a two-ballot system. The winning candidate has to get 50% or more of the vote. If no one gets 50%, then it goes to a second election with the top two candidates running off. This has only happened one time back in 1996, where Boris Yeltsin emerged victorious. As you can see there, Putin's percentages of winning have, in 2000, 53%, 71% in 2004, 64% in 2012. So turnout relatively high, and his winning percentage down a little bit in 2012 from 2002. You'll see that Medvedev, who was president there in the interim period there in 2008, won 70% of the vote also. All right, let's talk a little bit about interest groups. All right, the state corporatist system existed under the USSR, and again, it's still kind of a modified version in Putin's Russia. When we talk about a corporatist system, we're talking about where the state decides who they're going to negotiate with in order to make policy. So they're going to bring people in. So there's going to be internal influence decided upon by the state, not like here in the United States with our pluralist system where the influence comes from the inside out. There really wasn't any outside influences on policy making until the Soviet Union ended. All right. When the Soviet Union ends and those state-owned industries were put up for grabs, insiders, these oligarchs, were able to buy them at very low cost. Okay. And again, these oligarchs can be considered interest groups because they still, even today, have a pretty big influence on policy making because they have very large businesses and lots of income. The oligarchy, these rich elites, really worked hard behind the scenes in the early democracy in Russia. They propped up Yeltsin and helped him win that second term with that runoff election. They also organized when Yeltsin stepped down in order to support Putin when he took control. They created the Unity Party. Putin, after being placed in power, really resisted the oligarchs. He didn't want to be controlled by anyone, so he actually exiled and imprisoned any of those oligarchs who challenged his authority or power. Khodorkovsky, who was the richest man in Russia, was just released from prison prior to the Sochi Olympics. He's an example of one of the guys that he basically removed. He felt there was a threat to his power. Again, these actions have influenced many of the other oligarchs to withdraw from politics, and it really eliminates any real challenge to Putin's power. So the oligarchy, very influential, or the oligarchs very influential during Yeltsin's time in office there in the 90s. But then when we get to Putin, once he consolidates power, the oligarchs do not have the same influence. All right, the current state continues to own and manage many of the large industries. Again, the old Soviet Union's industries, many of them are still operated by the government. So we have a mixed system in Russia. A lot of the other large businesses are privately owned. They stay in line with Putin or they face sanctions. All right, most of these big industries are actually managed and run by Putin's allies. This type of corporatism is sometimes called insider privatization. So yes, we have markets, we have private ownership, but that private ownership was offered to those who had an inside track. It wasn't put out to the whole public to try to get these assets. It was done inside, or the inside circles of the old Soviet Union. All right, the Russian mafia we'll mention here briefly, or this is organized crime. Again, they have interests, and again, they're going to gain more power with the fall of the Soviet Union and the terrible economy of the 90s. They've used payoffs, murder, and corruption to control local businesses, banks, and government. The Russian media. Under the USSR, the media was state-owned. There was a lot of monitoring and control of the media. And with Gorbachev, you're going to see some opening. In 91, the media opened with the rest of Russia. But since 2000 and Putin's rise to power, the media has again been chilled. Most of Russian media is now owned by the government or is heavily influenced by it. All right, so the media is not going to be something that's going to be considered free in Russia today. All right, continuing with institutions, we'll jump to the presidency here. Very, very powerful executive branch. The president is the head of state. He is directly elected. He or she can be directly elected for a 6-year term with a 2 consecutive term limit. You need 1 million signatures to run, and as we mentioned before, it's a double ballot system. The prime minister is the head of government. This person is selected by the president, and he or she is a member of the majority party in the legislature. Presidential power, some of the prominent ones. The president has the power to appoint the prime minister and his cabinet. These must be approved by the Duma, but if the Duma does not approve, the president can dissolve it. The president can also issue decrees that have the force of law. This gives him a ton of power, and there's no real check on the president and his cabinet on what they can do because of this power to issue decrees. And then finally, he has the power to dissolve the Duma. There is no vice president. The prime minister becomes president if the president is unable to do his job. But again, he has the power to dissolve the legislature. All right, the legislature, not so strong. We have two houses. The lower house is the Duma, 450 members, proportional representation. Its jobs are to pass bills, approve the budget, and confirm presidential appointments. The upper house is the Federation Council, and this is based on the regions. You get 2 members from each of the 89 federal regions. One of those members is picked by the regional legislature, and one is picked by the governor. The upper house really doesn't have much power today. It's very similar to the House of Lords. It can delay. If the Federation Council rejects Duma legislation, the Duma can override it by a 2/3 margin. All right, if we talk about the judiciary in the Russian Federation, it's changed a bunch. The USSR did not have an independent judiciary. The Communist Party controlled all of the courts. So in 1993, that new constitution attempted to build an independent court system. They created a constitutional court with 19 members. These members are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Federation Council. And this actual court, this constitutional court, was designed as a check on the president's power, all right, to make sure that all of the laws and decrees that he would pass were going to be constitutional. Again, this is a great example of judicial review. Putin, when coming to power, moved this court from Moscow to St. Petersburg, away from the political center, and this court has yet to really use its power to check the president. So judicial review is not a reality in Russia today. They do also have what's called a Supreme Court, which is the highest court for any civil or criminal case, and it does not have judicial review. The judicial system in Russia today lacks trained lawyers. Legal reform is still slow in coming and in transition. Corruption continues to be a huge problem. Jury trials and presumption of innocence, which is the foundation of our system, is still not the norm. All right? No courts have challenged Putin or his power, and the courts have really been a tool of Putin. Again, Pussy Riot and the imprisonment of Khodorkovsky are examples. Thank you for joining me for this quick video on political institutions in Russia. Make sure to do the Google form.